Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the stone-cold shadows of a medieval castle, the kind where torches flicker against gray walls, and every sound echoes like a ghost clearing its throat. You can almost feel the chill through your socks. The air smells faintly of smoke, tallow candles, and wet wool. It's not exactly five-star comfort more, like sleeping in a refrigerator built by people who thought hygiene was suspicious. You probably wouldn't survive one night here without losing a few toes to frostbite. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and if you're already tucked in somewhere warm, okay? Post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where my night owls are listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the great hall of a 14th century fortress, a monument of gray stone and medieval optimism. The walls are thick enough to shrug off catapults, but not clever enough to trap warmth. The moment the sun dips, the entire structure starts to bleed heat through the stone. You'd think people back then would have invented insulation early, but nope. They built castles for defense, not for cozy winter nights. The small windows are glazed with oiled parchment or thin, cloudy glass if you're lucky, letting in pale daylight and a never-ending draft. Every gust of wind becomes a private insult. You shiver and pull your cloak tighter. The only real source of heat is the great hearth of vast, open fireplace that eats wood faster than a modern teenager eats snacks. Even standing close to it, your front feels like summer, while your back feels like Siberia. Servants rush around feeding logs into the flames, because the fire is not just decoration, it's survival. But all that heat escapes straight up the chimney, leaving the hall smoky and cold again within minutes. Historians still argue whether people genuinely found this tolerable, or if they were just too exhausted from the day's work to complain. You climb the worn stone steps to the upper chambers, your breath forming little clouds. The temperature drops with each turn. Heat rises, sure, but in castles, it also runs straight out the drafty windows and through every gap in the timber beams. By the time you reach the Lord's Solar, the private living quarters, it's less royal comfort and more luxury freezer with tapestries. Tapestries, though, are one of the clever tricks here. They aren't just for show. These thick, woven wall hangings filled with mythological beasts or awkward family crests act like primitive insulation, trapping air against the stone and dulling the cold. In the flickering candlelight, they even move slightly, like the walls themselves are breathing. You brush your hand along one and feel its dense wool, still faintly smelling of the sheep it once belonged to. Down below, the servants have less decoration and more suffering. Their quarters are near the ground, where damp seeps in like an uninvited relative. Many of them sleep in corners of storerooms or along corridor walls, wrapped in coarse blankets that feel like sleeping inside a burlap sack. The warmth from the hearth barely reaches them. Still, they endure it because the alternative is sleeping outside with the actual wolves. One quirky fact: medieval people sometimes warmed their beds with metal pans filled with hot coals called bed warmers. They'd glide them under the blankets for a few minutes, leaving just enough heat to take the bite off the sheets. It sounds cozy until you realize that one wrong move meant setting your bedding on fire. A sort of medieval Russian roulette, but smellier. You make your way toward the sleeping chambers reserved for guests, where the real nightly ordeal begins. There's no electricity, of course, just the quivering light of candles and oil lamps. The shadows they cast stretch and twist, making the carved faces on the wooden furniture seem alive. The smell of beeswax and smoke clings to everything. As you pass, you hear someone muttering a prayer, a simple plea for warmth, or perhaps for safety from whatever prowls the dark. The floor under your feet is a patchwork of rushes dried, beets, and herbs scattered to soak up spills and filth. They're replaced maybe once every few months, depending on how generous the household is feeling. The herbs lavender, rosemary, mint help disguise less pleasant odors. You crunch across them and imagine how cold it must feel stepping barefoot here at night. Castles weren't just homes, they were fortresses, symbols of power and constant reminders that comfort was a luxury. Firewood, for instance, was valuable. Keeping a hearth burning through the night was expensive, so only the wealthiest could afford to. The rest of the castle slept in relative darkness and deep chill. Even nobles would wake to frost on their blankets. There are records describing frozen water jugs inside bedchambers, which really sets the mood for romantic medieval evening. And yet, somehow, people managed. You can picture it, the household winding down after the day's chaos, the last embers glowing in the great hearth. Servants snuff candles, one by one, until only a faint orange shimmer remains. You hear the creak of timber, the sigh of wind through the cracks, maybe a dog barking in the courtyard. You're left with a sensation of immense stillness, the kind you only get in places built to outlast time itself. You might laugh at the thought of people sleeping here without modern comforts, but their bodies adapted. They went to bed early, rose with the sun, and learned to live with the cold as a constant companion. It was less a problem to fix and more a condition of life, like taxes or occasional plagues. Still, the image of huddling under a pile of rough blankets while your breath fogs in the air isn't exactly dreamy. That's why every castle developed its own set of tricks to hold on to whatever warmth they could, from thick curtains around beds to storing straw mattresses off the floor. You'll see all that soon enough, but for now, stand in the quiet and let yourself feel the strange beauty of it, the marriage of strength and discomfort. Fievel, outside. The wind moans through the arrow slits like the castle itself is whispering lullabies from centuries past. Somewhere below, a sleepy guard stamps his feet, trying to keep warm. You imagine how many generations stood right here, hoping the same tiny flame of warmth would last until morning. You pull your cloak tighter again, step closer to the fire, and wonder what it would take for you to fall asleep in a place like this. No central heating, no fuzzy socks, just courage, exhaustion, and a stubborn will to survive the night. You rub your hands together, still chasing the warmth that never quite arrives, and glance toward the chamber where your bed for the night waits. It's not much to look at: a wooden frame, a few sagging ropes, and a pile of bedding that's seen more winters than you'd care to count. Before you even climb in, though, you notice something else: layers upon layers of clothing hanging from hooks, draped over chairs, even stacked at the foot of the bed like armor for the night ahead. In the medieval world, warmth was a team effort, and fabric was your most loyal ally. You didn't go to bed in a t-shirt and pajama pants. You went to bed dressed like you were preparing to summit a small mountain. The layering started with linen, the base layer that everyone wore, rich or poor. Linen breathed well, wicked away sweat. It was easy to wash by medieval standards. Anyway, over that came wool, thick and scratchy, but gloriously warm. Sometimes 2 or 3 tunics deep, depending on how low the temperature dipped. You run your fingers across one of the cloaks hanging nearby, a heavy, hooded garment lined with rabbit fur. The fur is soft, but carries that faint, musky smell of something that once had opinions about carrots. Still, it beats freezing. Wealthier folk could afford exotic pelts: fox, beaver, even ermine if they were fancy enough to flaunt royal colors. Wearing fur wasn't just practical, it screamed status. If you wrapped yourself in ermine, you weren't just keeping warm. You were declaring, "I'm too important to shiver." The lower classes, of course, made do with wool and whatever scraps they could patch together. Peasants might wear the same garments day and night through the entire winter. The concept of pajamas didn't really exist until the Renaissance. And even then, only for those who could afford extra fabric. Everyone else just slept in what they'd worn all day, probably still damp from the weather and stiff from work. Historians still argue whether people did this for comfort or simply because taking clothes off in an unheated room felt like volunteering for hypothermia. You pull one of the woolen blankets over your shoulders, feeling its coarse texture scrape against your neck. It's surprisingly heavy, like a medieval, weighted blanket, but without the therapeutic TikTok aesthetic. Blankets were usually woven from wool or flannel, sometimes layered with animal hides when the frost got mean. The richer you were, the more layers you piled on. A noble might have a mattress stuffed with feathers, a feather bed above that, and a stack of blankets thick enough to hide a small sibling under. Downstairs, a servant yawns while brushing off an armful of bedding that smells faintly of smoke and lanolin. They'll have fewer options tonight, maybe a straw tick filled with dried rushes and one coarse blanket. To stay warm, servants often wore their cloaks to bed, pulled over their heads like hoods. It wasn't just modesty, it was self-preservation. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some medieval folks believed in warming layers that absorbed your body heat during the day so they'd radiate it back at night. So if your tunic had been snug under your armor all day, great news, it was now your best sleeping garment. You were basically recharging your clothes like a medieval battery. Whether this actually worked is debatable, but it gave people a comforting illusion of science long before the word existed. The layering didn't stop at clothing. Bed layering was its own art form. First came the mattress often, a sack of straw or reeds, known as a palliasse. On top of that, if you were lucky, went a feathered mattress, soft and insulating. Then came a linen sheet, maybe a wool blanket or two, and finally a fur coverlet. You can practically feel the weight pinning you down. It's the air between each layer trapping little pockets of warmth like a medieval insulation system. And then there was the canopy. In noble chambers, beds were more like architectural installations, massive. It's four-poster affairs with curtains thick enough to stop a draft and perhaps even a few nosy servants' glances. You'd climb in, draw the curtains, and suddenly you were in a tiny, private microclimate, your own warm little fortress within the cold stone walls. As you pull back one of those curtains, a gust of musty air hits you. It smells like wax, wood smoke, and a hint of human centuries of it. You sneeze, because apparently medieval dust is timeless. But inside, the space feels oddly cozy. Candlelight turns the heavy fabric into golden velvet, and the faint sound of the wind outside becomes a distant lullaby. You settle in, the layers pressing close, your feet immediately searching for that one slightly warmer spot. It's hard to move, and even harder to imagine how people manage to turn over without dragging the entire bedding pile along with them. You hear someone in the next room grumble, and another laugh softly. The communal closeness, even muffled through walls, gives the castle a strange heartbeat. A funny thought strikes you. Layering didn't just protect against cold, it protected against judgment. A lady might wear so many garments that getting undressed took half an hour and 2 attendants, and in winter she might skip that process entirely. If someone asked why she slept in her gown, she could just murmur, "Fashion never sleeps." But beneath all the jokes, there's admiration. People didn't just endure the cold, they developed an entire philosophy around it. The layering wasn't random. It reflected a worldview of balance, modesty, and endurance. Your body heat was precious, almost sacred, and you learned to guard it like treasure. Historians still argue whether medieval layering was more practical or symbolic, whether it stemmed from superstition about night air entering the body, or simply a survival instinct honed by too many frozen nights. Either way, it worked well enough for people to keep doing it for centuries. The candle beside your bed flickers. The walls hum faintly with wind. You sink deeper into the mound of fabric, imagining generations before you performing the same sleepy ritual, adding one more layer, tucking it just so, whispering a prayer for warmth. The fire downstairs has died down now, leaving only the scent of smoke drifting upward through the cracks. You pull the final blanket over your head, the world narrowing to soft fabric and your own slow breath. The cold is still there, yes, but it's pushed to the edges, kept at bay by linen, wool, and the stubborn persistence of human comfort. You close your eyes, smiling faintly. Maybe, just maybe, you'd survive one medieval night after all if you layered like a legend. You stretch under your pile of wool and fur and feel the uneven surface. Beneath you a reminder that medieval mattresses weren't exactly crafted by sleep scientists. What you're lying on is a straw tick. Basically, a giant sack stuffed with dried grass or reeds. It crinkles with every move, releasing a faint smell like a barn in July. Not unpleasant, exactly just gruel. The tick rests on a wooden frame strung with ropes, tied tightly in a crisscross pattern to support your weight. Over time, those ropes loosened, and the bed sagged like an overworked hammock. That's where the saying, sleep tight, came from. Every few nights, you'd tighten the ropes before climbing in. Otherwise, you'd roll into the middle, okay? Like a burrito of discomfort. You give the rope frame a little bounce and wince as it creaks ominously. The sound echoes through the chamber, blending with the wind pressing against the shutters. But compared to sleeping on a cold stone floor, worse, the damp earth outside the castle walls, this is practically luxury. The wealthy could afford feather beds. Great sacks filled with goose, down, or duck feathers, light and bouncy, though prone to attracting the occasional pest. Feathers shifted around during the night, so you'd wake up half sunk, half floating, like sleeping in a lukewarm cloud that decided to migrate south. For the servants, straw was all they could tift. Peasants might sleep on piles of rushes spread on the floor, sometimes shared with family members, sometimes with a family dog. Straw wasn't just bedding, it was a survival tool. When it got damp, you dried it by the fire. When it got too filthy to stand, you used it to feed the fire. And when new straw came in after harvest, it was cause for celebration, a literal fresh bed. You shift your weight again, and the straw rustles beneath you like dry applause. Funny enough, medieval people didn't expect their beds to last. The straw was changed seasonally. The tick was shaken out, cleaned, and restuffed when possible. But feather bedso, those were heirlooms. People passed them down through generations, right alongside titles and silverware. Imagine inheriting your great-grandmother's bed and thinking, well, it still smells fine enough. Historians still argue whether people truly found feather beds comfortable. Some claim they were too soft, that sleepers woke, aching, and overheated. Others say they were the ultimate medieval luxury, a cocoon that separated nobles from the miserable chill of reality. One 15th century French lady even had hers perfumed with herbs and rosewater. Though that might have been less about romance and more about disguising what happens when you sweat under 30 pounds of blankets. You notice how the bed itself sits high off the ground? Another strategic move. The higher the bed, the less exposure to cold drafts that hugged the floors. Plus, it gave space for storage underneath. Trunks, linens, and, in some noble houses, a trundle bed for servants or children. And if you were wondering, yes, mice sometimes moved in down there too. Turning bedfellows into a broader term than anyone intended, your fingers trace the edge of the wooden frame. It's thick, carved, and built to last. Many medieval beds were works of art, with intricate posts and headboards etched with vines, saints, or heraldic beasts. They weren't just for sleeping, they were status statements. The Lord's bed might even be portable, disassembled and carted between estates. When you picture medieval travel, think less carry-on suitcase and more let's pack the bed and a few servants to rebuild it. You lean back and imagine the nightly ritual. Servants coming in before bedtime, shaking out the linens, plumping the mattress with wooden paddles, tucking the blankets neatly. They'd light the bed with a warming pan of metal dish of hot coals gliding between the sheets to chase off the chill. A gentle hiss, a puff of smoke, maybe a scorch mark or two if someone got distracted. Medieval fire safety wasn't exactly a science. Some beds were shared by couples, yes, but also by siblings, servants, or even guests. A great bed could easily sleep half a dozen people. The famous Great Bed of Ware built in England around 1590, was more than 10 feet wide and reportedly slept 12 adults at once. It became such a curiosity that tourists paid to sleep in it, proving that humanity has always been weird about travel accommodations. You roll onto your side, listening to the faint rhythm of your heartbeat against the straws rustle. For a moment, the sounds of the castle blend into a lullaby, the distant snore of someone down the hall. The sigh of embers, the occasional drip of melted snow from the roof. You can almost forget how cold it is. Here's your quirky fact of the night. Some medieval people sprinkled aromatic herbs like lavender, pennyroyal, or mugwort to their straw bedding, not for romance, but for pest control. These herbs repelled fleas and lice, the eternal bedtime companions of the Middle Ages. Of course, the smell could get overwhelming. One chronicler joked that some chambers reeked of gardens, yet not of virtue. You'd sleep in a meadow-scented haze, half relieved, half sneezing. As the fire downstairs burns low, your room dims. Candlelight wavers, throwing soft gold against the wooden posts. The bed creaks when you breathe too deeply. You pull the covers up to your chin and wonder how long it takes to stop noticing the cold. Entirely how long before your body just accepts it, adapts, and decides that a straw tick is as good as a modern memory foam mattress. In the end, that's what people did. They adapted. They learned how to lie still to conserve heat, how to position their bodies so the blankets didn't slide off, how to share warmth when they could. Bedtime wasn't about comfort, it was about endurance. Wrapped in tradition, you close your eyes and imagine the countless people who've done the same before you. The smell of straw and wool becomes the scent of survival. The faint crackle of ropes, the whisper of 1,000 nights endured. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the ancient wish that echoed through every frozen winter. Just make it till morning. You wake in the dim glow of candlelight, that unmistakable smoky scent clinging to your hair. The fire in the hearth sputters, its embers winking like sleepy eyes. You stretch beneath your pile of blankets, realizing something vital. You can't feel your nose. It's as if it clocked out for the night. Welcome to the medieval morning after time, when warmth was fleeting and fire was currency. Fire was everything. It dictated where people gathered, where they worked, and, most importantly, how they survived the night. You shuffle toward the fireplace, watching the flames lick at the blackened stones. In a medieval castle, this was both heart and hazard. The great hall's hearth was vast, sometimes large enough to roast an ox, and its heat was meant to rise through the entire building. Theoretically, anyway. In practice, it mostly heated the ceiling and left everyone else wondering why smoke and comfort refused to cooperate. There were smaller hearths in chambers like this, one private. Fires meant for nobles or high-ranking guests. These fireplaces had tall chimneys and narrow throats, designed to draw smoke out, but they didn't always succeed. You cough lightly as a gust of wind sends a puff of gray haze right into your face. The stone absorbs the warmth faster than it can radiate it, which means unless you stand so close your boots start to steam, you're still cold. To combat this, people got creative. They built canopies, hung thick bed curtains, and draped heavy fabrics across walls to trap whatever heat the hearth produced. Imagine sleeping behind a curtain so dense it muffled sound and sealed in your own breath. Within that tiny fabric fortress, the air grew warmer, slightly stale, perhaps, but comforting. Curtains weren't just decoration, they were climate control. Without them, even the best fire couldn't compete with the castle's drafts. You draw one of those curtains aside and peer out. The flickering light turns the room into a small universe glow. Shadow, gold, and black. The thick fabric smells faintly of smoke and lanolin, like everything else in this world. You let it fall shut again, enjoying the instant, fragile warmth. It's almost like a cocoon now. Thor's a historical fact for you. Fire in medieval castles was so essential that many, Households employed a watching boy or nightman whose only job was to tend the embers. He'd sleep near the hearth, rousing every few hours to poke the fire, add wood. He dozed off, and it went out face, the kind of scolding that could melt lead. The constant fear wasn't just freezing, it was burning the castle down. Fire, that fickle friend, could save or destroy. You glanced toward the ceiling. Above the hearth, centuries of soot have stained the stones black. The air smells faintly metallic, like old smoke trapped forever. You imagine how thick the haze would have been before chimneys were perfected smoke, filling the room, curling around tapestries, staining hair and lungs alike. Some historians still argue whether people simply grew used to it, or whether their constant coughing was considered a normal soundtrack to Winter. 2. Make matters more amusing or tragic, many castles didn't have fireplaces in every room until the late Middle Ages. For most of history, smaller chambers were heated only by what bled through the walls from nearby fires. You might sleep wrapped in 5 blankets, 2 layers of wool, and the faint hope that your lord kept the hearth burning in the hall below. It wasn't just how cozy can we make this, it was how do we not die before sunrise. You move back to your bed, tracing the carved posts with your fingertips. The curtains there too are heavy, woven from thick wool or velvet if you were rich enough. The poor had to improvise, hanging old cloaks or even spare sheets around their beds. They formed bed tents, a common medieval trick to create miniature warm zones. Inside, your body heat bounced off the enclosed space, recycling itself. You'd breathe in air that smelled faintly of smoke, sweat, and candle wax, but at least it was warm. And speaking of candles, their light dances along the ceiling now, throwing soft, trembling halos across the beams. Candles were as valuable as they were fragile. Tallow wands made from rendered animal fat were cheap but smoky and smelly. Beeswax candles, on the other hand, burned, clean, and bright. Their honeyed scent a luxury reserved for churches or nobility. The flicker of one beeswax candle by your bedside meant wealth, refinement, and let's be honest, a better smelling room. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some people believed bed curtains didn't just keep out drafts, they kept out evil spirits. The night air, or miasma, was thought to carry sickness and demons. So, if you wrapped yourself up tight, you weren't just staying warm. You were defending your soul. Medieval sleep was, apparently, a full contact sport between heat conservation and metaphysical warfare. The fire pops loudly, spark leaping into the air before dying on the hearthstone. You can't help but laugh softly. It's like the castle's way of reminding you who's boss. You imagine the nightly routine of a household servant tasked with managing it, hauling wood through icy corridors, bowing before half-asleep nobles, carefully placing logs to ensure just enough flame but not too much smoke. There was a kind of rhythm to it, a choreography of survival. If you were wealthy enough, you might even own a portable brazier and iron pan filled with embers that could be carried to your chamber. Set it near your feet, and you'd feel the gentle pulse of warmth radiating upward. Of course, gentle could quickly become dangerous, as these braziers occasionally set bedclothes ablaze. Historians still debate whether people underestimated the fire risk or just accepted it as a necessary gamble. Medieval living, after all, was one long negotiation between danger and comfort. You settled back into bed, drawing the curtain once more. Outside your little cocoon, the castle hums faintly with the slow crackle of fires in other rooms. The shuffle of guards, changing shifts, the wind pressing against the shutters like a restless spirit. Inside, it's warm enough now that your breath no longer clouds the air. You think of how modern people talk about hygge. That cozy Danish comforter mug of cocoa, a blanket, maybe a candle. Medieval folk had their own version. Warmth as a reward for endurance, a victory over the night. No cocoa, true, but maybe a cup of warm ale and a crackling hearth that, for once, didn't smoke you out. The firelight fades lower, and the walls swallow the glow until all that remains is the faint shimmer of embers. You realize that for all the discomfort, something intimate about it. Humans and fire, face to face, both fragile and necessary. In this cold stone fortress, every spark mattered. Every bit of heat was a tiny rebellion against the winter outside. You close your eyes and let the warmth of the dying fire brush against your skin, feeling both its comfort and its threat. Fire was life here, imperfect, smoky, unpredictable, but somehow it kept entire generations from freezing to death. The fire's warmth lingers on your skin as you pull back into the layered fortress of your bed. The curtains sway slightly with a draft that sneaks in from somewhere, probably a crack wide enough to fit a rat with ambition. You pull the covers closer and glance down at your own clothes, or what counts as them, tonight. That's when you realize, in the medieval world, bedtime fashion was its own peculiar battlefield between comfort, superstition, and sheer practicality. Let's start with what you're wearing, or what you might be if you were truly one of them. If you're a peasant, chances are you didn't have anything special for sleeping. You'd simply crawl into bed wearing your day clothes, wool tunic, hose, maybe even your belt if you couldn't be bothered to take it off. Laundry was a rare and laborious ordeal, so stripping down just to climb into cold sheets was a luxury few could afford. The idea of owning an outfit solely for sleep would have sounded as absurd as owning an outfit just for eating soup for the wealthy, though sleepwear was a bit more elaborate. The noblemen slipped into long linen nightshirts, think somewhere between a chemise and a shapeless, oversized t-shirt. It reached down to the knees or ankles, billowing like a small tent. The material was fine and smooth, sometimes embroidered around the collar or cuffs with subtle gold or silk thread. Linen was the go-to because it was breathable, clean, and symbolically pure. If you were noble enough, even your dreams deserved luxury fiber. You stretch out a hand and feel the soft edge of one such garment lying folded on a nearby stool. The linen catches candlelight like a pale ghost. It smells faintly of lavender water, which nobles often used to scent their laundry, not for vanity, but because unwashed servants handled it. A touch of floral cover-up made everyone's lives more bearable. And for women, the same principle: linen, long, loose butt, sometimes layered with shifts or smocks. A married lady might keep her head covered, even in bed, for modesty and warmth. Those fine veils you see in medieval portraits weren't just for daytime elegance. They doubled as nighttime insulation. Imagine trying to get comfortable with half a pound of fabric pinned to your scalp. Here's a quirky tidbit. Not everyone actually wore clothing to bed. Some folks believed sleeping naked allowed the body to breathe, a curious mix of medieval health theory and common sense. Physicians of the era claimed that tight or layered clothing trapped bad humors and made the sleeper vulnerable to disease. On the other hand, plenty of moralists condemned the practice as scandalous and ungodly. So if you stripped down, you were either a visionary health enthusiast or a sinner, depending on who caught you. Historians still argue whether the naked sleepers were brave, reckless, or just too tired to care. You pull your blanket a little higher because, whether clothed or bare, the medieval night was not forgiving. There's a dampness to the air that seeps through even the thickest fabric, a kind of invisible cold that finds every gap. You imagine how people clung to their linen shifts, not just for modesty, but as an emotional shield, something between their skin and the enormity of the cold. Sleep attire could even mark your social rank. Monks, for instance, were known to sleep fully dressed in their habits, not out of laziness, but out of devotion and readiness should the bell ring for midnight prayer. They were already decent enough to shuffle straight to chapel. In contrast, a noble lounging in his nightshirt symbolized privilege, the freedom to disrobe, to relax, to let the castle's army of servants handle emergencies. While he snored beneath his fur coverlet, you shift your position and hear the faint rustle of fabric, the layers of your bedding rubbing against the soft linen. It's oddly soothing, a kind of whispered lullaby in textile form. In the glow of a dwindling candle, You can almost see the contrast between two worlds. The peasant curled up fully clothed by the dying hearth, and the Lord sprawled in crisp linen behind velvet curtains, both of them, ultimately, chasing the same fragile warmth. There's a historical fact you can't ignore here. Washing clothes was such a monumental effort that nightshirts were among the few garments regularly cleaned. The rest, not so much. The combination of sweat, smoke, and animal fat from tallow candles meant people carried their day with them literally. A clean linen nightshirt wasn't just comfortable. It was an act of self-care and maybe even quiet rebellion against grime. But fashion aside, bedtime was also tangled with superstition. People feared what could happen when they slept deeply: nightmares, spirits, even suffocation by unseen forces. The act of undressing could make you feel vulnerable, spiritually and physically. Some folks crossed themselves before removing garments, muttering small prayers like armor against invisible dangers. "May the Lord guard my soul as I lie defenseless" was more than a pious phrase. It was a genuine bedtime mantra. You lie back and look toward the flickering candle stub. Its light paints long shadows that dance across the ceiling beams, the way flames have always done in the hours before sleep. You imagine all those nightshirts and shifts glowing faintly in the dark, white against the gloom like soft ghosts keeping their owners company. There's another funny little detail: the medieval notion of sleeping posture manuals on health advised people to lie on their right side first to aid digestion, then roll to the left halfway through the night. The right was considered holy, the left suspicious, because of course it was. If you happened to snore or sleep with your mouth open, well, that wasn't just unattractive. It was downright dangerous. They believed demons could slip in that way. Maybe that's why some slept with their heads half covered. By their shifts or veils, a literal guard against bad breath from beyond. Historians still debate whether these bedtime habits were rooted more in hygiene or in sheer fear. Did people really believe their souls could wander during sleep? Probably. Did they also believe a warm linen nightshirt might help keep them tethered to their bodies? Quite possibly. Medieval minds found poetry in everything. Even the act of staying warm. The candle finally gives up, the flame bowing into smoke. The scent of melted wax joins the lingering smell of wool and wood ash. You close your eyes, feeling the linen shift gently against your skin, smooth and faintly cool. There's comfort in its simplicity, a small luxury that's both practical and human. For all the fuss, all the theories about warmth and virtue, the truth was simple. People did whatever it took to make the long, cold nights survivable, whether bundled in fur, draped in linen, or stripped down to courage alone. They faced the dark with the same sleepy hope you do now that morning will come, and with it, another chance to chase the warmth again. You wake to movement in the dark, the subtle sound of someone shifting nearby. A cough, the scrape of a boot against the wooden floor. For a moment, you freeze, unsure if it's a dream. Then you remember, you're not alone in this bed. You never were. Welcome to one of medieval life's least appreciated realities, communal sleeping. You turn your head slightly, and there they are, two shapes under the same mound of blankets, breathing softly, the occasional snore weaving into the rhythm of the night. Sharing a bed wasn't just common, it was expected. Heating an entire castle was impossible, so warmth came from what the body could provide. The more bodies, the better. It was practical, social, and sometimes awkward in ways you're already imagining in a peasant's cottage. The entire family might sleep together in a single bed, or even directly on the floor, wrapped in whatever cloth was available. Infants, parents, and maybe the family dog formed one lumpy, snoring ecosystem of survival. It wasn't scandalous. It was normal. Privacy, as we know it, didn't exist. You simply turned your back, muttered a good night, did the occasional elbow to the ribs as part of life. Here in the castle, it's a bit more structured. Servants share beds with other servants, pages with pages, and travelers with whoever happens to be available. You might be a guest of some distinction, but if the castle's full, don't expect your own mattress. You'll be told to double up, perhaps with someone you met at supper, in an age without central heating. Modesty bent easily under the weight of frost. You try to move quietly, adjusting the blanket, but your bedfellow stirs. A muffled voice, half asleep, half irritated, mumbles something about stealing the warm side. You smile faintly. The concept of personal space, you realize, was invented much later. Even nobility weren't immune to sharing. Kings and queens, of course, had grand beds, but they often slept surrounded by attendants, maids, guards, even ladies-in-waiting who kept watch through the night. It was part ritual, part security measure, and part practical heating solution. Some lords invited favorite guests or allies to share their bed, not for scandal, but for trust. It was political intimacy, a warm and literal demonstration of loyalty. You might chuckle, but its true sharing a bed was once a sign of camaraderie, not impropriety. Soldiers on campaign, monks in abbeys, apprentices in crowded guild halls all slept shoulder to shoulder. The term bedfellow used to mean companion, nothing more. Imagine explaining that to a modern audience without snickers. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. The famous English playwright William Shakespeare once mentioned in his will that he left his second best bed to his wife, Anne Hathaway. Historians still argue whether that was a snub or a gesture of love. In his time, the best bed was usually reserved for guests. The marital bed, where warmth and life were shared, was often the second best. Sentimental or shady, it depends on how much of a romantic you think he was. You adjust the blanket again and notice the bed itself radiates heat less from fire, more from the accumulation of living bodies. It's humid, warm, and not entirely pleasant, yet oddly comforting. The air smells like linen, sweat, and faint traces of the herbs tucked into the mattress straw. Somewhere nearby, a dog sighs in its sleep. Now, for the quirky tidbit. Some households actually assigned sleeping quarter by social rank or temperature preference. The warmest spot, the one furthest from the drafty edge, went to the most important person. Guests of honor in great halls often slept in the center of long communal mattresses, flanked by others who served as living insulation. It sounds cozy until you realize what a nightmare it must have been for light sleepers. Your thoughts drift to how this setup must have shaped human connection. You could learn a lot about a person by sharing a bed with them, their breathing, their murmurs, even their dreams. Intimacy wasn't limited to romance. It was part of community life. You'd fall asleep to the rhythm of others' heartbeats, wake to shared laughter, or grumbling when someone kicked off the covers. In a world where survival depended on warmth, sleep was a collective act. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about this arrangement. Some medieval moralists worried that bed sharing bred sand or gossip. The church issued the occasional scolding, insisting that unmarried folks should avoid improper proximity. Yet in a freezing castle or overcrowded, in virtue often lost to practicality. Historians still argue whether such moral warnings were about real misbehavior or just another example of the church trying to micromanage human nature. You shift again, trying not to disturb the others. Outside the bed curtains, the castle creaks, the sound of wood adjusting to cold air, of distant footsteps echoing in corridors. You can almost sense how, across centuries, countless others lay just like this, shoulder to shoulder, trading warmth and dreams through endless winters. It's tempting to romanticize it too. Imagine laughter and whispered stories before sleep, but there were drawbacks. Fleas, lice, and other unwelcome guests loved shared beds. If one sleeper had an infestation, everyone joined the party. Some people sprinkled their bedding with herbs or even dried rose petals to discourage pests and mask odors. You can picture someone in the dark muttering, "Don't scratch a till, wake the Lord." The air grows warmer with every breath. It's stifling now, but you don't dare push the covers aside. Cold drafts wait like patient assassins. You shift just enough to make room for a leg, trying not to brush against your bedmates. This delicate choreography repeats. Every night across the castle, the shared ballet of half sleep, half dash tolerance. Then there's the social aspect. Lying in the same bed was a perfect setting for gossip and secrets. Families discussed everything from harvest worries to romantic confessions under those blankets. In noble households, even politics unfolded in whispers before dawn. You can imagine alliances sealed not with ink and wax, but with murmured words traded between yawns. And yet, there's something deeply human about it. You begin to understand why people accepted the lack of privacy. Companionship was its own kind of warmth. In the dead of winter, when frost painted the inside of the windows and the fire was down to embers, having another person breathing beside you meant safety, proof that you weren't alone in the long dark. You close your eyes and listen. One bedfellow snored softly. Another mutters something that might be a dream or a prayer. The air hums with life, a quiet pulse of shared survival. Maybe you think it wasn't about comfort or convenience at all. Maybe people slept together because being alone in a castle like this, cold, vast, and full of creaks, was a far colder fate. You let that thought drift through you, warm and heavy, as the shared breath of the room carries you towards sleep again. For all its awkwardness and noise, this communal closeness feels oddly right, proof that even in the harshest nights, humans found ways to keep each other warm. You wake again, though not to the gentle sounds of your bedfellows. This time, it's the castle itself, stirring the faint groan of timbers, a drip of water from the ceiling somewhere, and the muffled thud of something heavy in the hallway. The fire's long gone out. Cold breathes through the cracks in the stone. It's curling around your toes, like it's come to check if you're still alive. You're not imagining if this castle is freezing. And while you've done your best with bedding, furs, and shared body heat, there's only so much one can do when sleeping inside what is essentially a fortified refrigerator. So, how did people keep warm through winter nights that could make even the bravest night whimper? You sit up, pulling the blanket tight, and glance toward the hearth. A few gray embers still glow faintly, their heat barely enough to keep a mouse cozy. Someone, maybe a servant or page, will be up soon to stir it back to life. But in the meantime, this chill is your reality. The thick stone walls that protect you from invaders also guard the cold inside, like it's a treasured guest. The first and simplest strategy: layers. Not just clothing layers, but life layers. People lived, ate, and even slept in layers of insulation, straw, and humanity itself. Curtains around the bed weren't decorative frills. They were life-saving fabric barriers that trapped the warm breath you exhaled. The bed was its own microclimate, a tiny tropical island adrift in a sea of frost. And when that wasn't enough, you improvised. Hot stones or heated bricks were common bedtime companions. A servant might wrap a brick in cloth, warm it by the fire, and slip it beneath your bedding before you climbed in. It was the medieval equivalent of a heated blanket, simple, effective, and slightly dangerous if you rolled onto it wrong. One chronicler even wrote about a nobleman who scorched his bedsheets and declared it a sign of divine wrath. Spoiler, it was just bad aim. But not all warming tricks were so civilized. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some people actually kept small dogs in bed as living heaters. The lapdog breeds we know today weren't bred for beauty alone. They were literal hot water bottles with tails. Ladies of the court often slept with a little spaniel or bitchin nestled under the covers. There's even an old French term for them: chien de lit, bed dog. If you've ever woken up to a dog stealing the warm spot, congratulations, You're part of a 1,000-year-old tradition. You swing your legs out of bed and instantly regret it. The floor is so cold, it could double as a weapon. You tiptoe toward the shuttered window, careful not to wake the others. Your breath fogs in front of you. The air smells faintly metallic, the scent of frost meeting ancient stone. You imagine this same cold seeping through centuries, mocking every attempt at comfort. Historians still argue whether castles were truly as cold as legends suggest. Some point out that thick walls, once heated, could retain warmth surprisingly well. Others argue the opposite, that the sheer size and draftiness made them impossible to heat evenly. Its truth probably lies somewhere in between, tolerable in the great hall when the fire blazed, brutal everywhere else once night fell. You move toward the hearth, crouching near the ashes, rubbing your hands for phantom warmth. There's a battered iron pot, their last night's coals sealed inside with ash to preserve the heat. A clever trick, and one that saved time in the morning. You can almost hear the clatter of servants coming soon to revive it, muttering about lazy nobles who sleep while honest folk freeze. Another, less charming heat source: people themselves. In larger rooms, servants sometimes slept on pallets around their lord's bed, acting as a human buffer against the cold air. The arrangement had practical advantages too. If you shouted for help, someone was already halfway awake. Still, it made for crowded quarters and, well, limited romance. You can imagine how much fun it was to wake up with 6 groggy servants snoring like an orchestra of bagpipes. Fireplaces, when available, weren't the cozy marvels you might picture. Early medieval hearths were smoky nightmares, inefficient, and prone to sending more warmth up the chimney than into the room. It wasn't until later centuries that designs improved enough to make them moderately effective. And even then, the warmth rarely traveled far from the flames. The person nearest the fire roasted, the one farthest froze. It was a delicate art of seat selection. You think about all the maintenance it took to keep a castle even vaguely warm. What had to be chopped, hauled, dried, and rationed. Fire had to be tended constantly, and heaven help the servant who let it die during the night, especially if frost found its way into the Lord's bedchamber. A cold noble was a cranky noble, and a cranky noble could ruin your week. Here's the historical fact for this section. Archaeologists studying castle remains have found that rooms were often divided into inner and outer chambers, not just for privacy, but for heat conservation. The inner chamber where the lord or lady slept was more enclosed, with tapestries and rugs on the walls acting as primitive insulation. Stone didn't hold heat well, but fabric did. It was an early form of interior climate control, centuries before radiators. You picture yourself rolling up one of those heavy wall hangings and using it as a makeshift duvet. The pattern may be a faded hunting scene, wouldn't mind. At this point, anything's fair game. You even consider crawling back under the bed curtains and pretending you're a baked potato in winter storage. But here's something modern minds rarely consider. Medieval people were simply more tolerant of cold. They grew up in unheated spaces, worked outdoors, and accepted discomfort as a natural state of being. Their bodies adapted. Their expectations were different. Cold wasn't the enemy, it was part of life's texture. Still, that didn't stop them from being inventive. Some households experimented with bed warmers, small metal pans filled with embers swung beneath the sheets to preheat them. Romantic in theory, perilous in practice. More than one bed went up in flames thanks to overzealous warming. Historians still argue whether these devices were widely used or just a luxury for the overly optimistic. You rub your hands again, feeling pins and needles as warmth returns. Outside, wind moans against the shutters. The castle seems alive, breathing, groaning, settling deeper into its ancient bones. And in that sound, you realize the secret that kept its inhabitants from freezing to death wasn't just technology or tricks. It was endurance, the ability to face every winter, every night, with small acts of defiance. A layer of wool here, a loyal dog there, a curtain drawn just tight enough to trap a sigh of warmth. They didn't conquer the cold, they learned to live with it. And in that lesson, maybe, lies something timeless. You crawl back into bed, slipping between cool sheets that soon warm against your skin. The air still bites at your nose, but under the covers, it's almost cozy. Your bedfellow grumbles softly, half asleep, and you smile into the dark. Outside, the world freezes solid. Inside, humanity endures warmth built from breath, closeness, and sheer stubbornness. The morning never really arrives in a castle the way it does in modern life, seeps in reluctantly. You open your eyes to the faintest silver light filtering through narrow arrow slits, the kind that looks less like dawn and more like the world apologizing for still existing. Your breath still fogs in the air, and your hair smells faintly of smoke and wool. Someone's already moving outside your bed curtains, whispering, rattling something metallic. Breakfast preparation, perhaps. But here's the thing, getting up isn't immediate. Medieval sleep wasn't one long, unbroken stretch like the 8 hours you're told to chase today. Instead, the night itself came in halves. You didn't wake up early because of an alarm clock. You woke up because that's simply how humans used to sleep. You roll onto your back, stare at the canopy above, and realize you're right between what the medieval world called first sleep and second sleep. The middle of the night, the watch wasn't meant for panic or insomnia. It was a normal, even productive, time to be briefly awake. After the first 4 or 5 hours, you'd stir naturally. Maybe you'd chat quietly with whoever shared your bed, say a prayer, tend a fire, or sneak to the chamber pot. Then you'd slide back under the covers for your second round of rest. The idea that a good night's sleep means one continuous stretch, that's a modern invention. You shift your blanket, listening to the castle's nocturnal rhythm. Somewhere, a servant yawns as he stokes the fire. A few muffled laughs echo down the corridor, someone else awake between sleeps. You can almost feel the medieval world breathing alongside you, caught in that same twilight state. Mainstream historical fact time, documents from the 15th and 16th centuries diaries, letters, even medical texts confirm that this segmented sleep pattern was normal. People called it first sleep premier sommeil and second sleep second sommeil, separated by an hour or two of quiet wakefulness. Scholars and monks even used that gap to read or pray. One English doctor advised his patients to rise and muse between sleeps for better digestion. You can't help but smile, apparently. Midnight snacking and overthinking have ancient roots. You sit up, slowly, the blankets falling around you in folds like spilled clouds. Your fingers brush the coarse linen sheets, still warm from shared body heating. You imagine what people did in this calm, candlelit limbo. Some couples whispered together. Others told stories or dreamed aloud. Parents might nurse a baby. Servants might rearrange logs or check the shutters. Travelers might write a note by flickering light. It wasn't insomnia. It was living life in installments. The quirky tidbit. Some people believed the interval between sleeps was the best time for conception. Medieval physicians claimed the body was most balanced, then neither sluggish from too much food nor restless from the day. The theory spread wide enough that moralists began warning against unholy acts between sleeps, which probably made everyone chuckle into their pillows. Historians still argue whether this was genuine medical belief or just an elaborate excuse invented by candlelight dot. You shuffle toward the edge of the bed and peer past the curtains. The room glows faintly, lit by the coals someone's revived in the hearth. Shadows of tapestries sway against the walls, rippling with each flicker. You can smell warm air returning, faintly tinged with damp wood and smoke. It feels ancient. Somehow this moment between darkness and dawn is shared across centuries. Outside your chamber, someone moves quietly down the corridor. Footsteps on stone, a soft creak of wood. You picture a servant carrying a candle in a small log basket. Keep the eternal castle shuffle. Keep the Lord warm. Keep the fire fed. Don't trip on the dog. Somewhere deeper in the keep, a priest might be muttering through matins, his voice echoing faintly through the chapel. The world feels half awake, half dreaming, and as you sit there, the thought creeps in, maybe our modern, uninterrupted sleep isn't the normal one. Maybe what you're experiencing now, this soft in-between state, is closer to the natural rhythm of human rest. The mind wanders gently, unhurried, the body resetting not once, but twice. No alarms, no screens, just the sound of breathing with crackling, and the pulse of your own thoughts. You reach for the pitcher of water left on the side table. The liquid's cold enough to make your teeth ache, but refreshing. People in castles often drink diluted wine or small ale, and night water alone could be risky, even deadly, depending on the source. But you sip anyway, savoring the chill, imagining what it must have felt like to live in a world where the night wasn't an obstacle, but a landscape to explore in pieces. And now, the open debate. Historians still argue whether this two-phase sleep was universal or just common among literate or urban Europeans. Some claim peasants, exhausted from labor, probably collapsed into one long, dreamless sleep. Others insist even they woke naturally in the middle of the night, if only to feed the fire or check on animals. Whatever the truth, segmented sleep faded with the rise of artificial lighting and stricter schedules. Once we could turn night into day, we forced our bodies to pretend darkness was optional. You stretch again, the cold brushing your bare forearms. For a brief second, you're not in a medieval castle at all, you're simply human. Halfway through the night, existing in that universal space between waking and dreaming. You imagine people across history doing the same thing. Roman farmers, Viking sailors, Buddhist monks, all pausing at midnight, wrapped in silence. You settle back under the covers, the warmth swallowing you whole. One of your bedfellows murmurs and shifts, maybe reacting to the faint noise of wind rattling the shutters. The quiet becomes soft, almost thick. You think of how many fears and prayers once filled this same hour, pleas for a good harvest, protection from spirits, or simply the return of morning light. There's something deeply peaceful about it. The first sleep washed the world away. The second brings it back gently. You lie there, listening to the faint heartbeat of the castle fires being poked. Boots shuffling, someone stifling a sneeze in the corridor. The rhythm is ancient, almost biological, like the heartbeat of civilization itself. As your eyes begin to drift closed again, you think of one last image, a monk somewhere across the kingdom, his candle flickering over parchment as he writes a line in neat Latin script about the stillness of this hour, the same hour that now carries you back down into your second sleep. And for a fleeting moment, across all that time, you're both awake together, just two humans sharing the same fragile midnight breath before the world dreams again. When morning finally pushes through the cracks of the castle, it doesn't come with trumpets or sunshine. It arrives reluctantly, as if even the sun can't be bothered to get out of bed. The gray light feels heavy, seeping between the shutters and washing the chamber in a pale fog. Your nose is cold, your fingers are stiff, and the fire has retreated into a nest of quiet ashes. But outside your curtains, you can already hear the low hum of people beginning their day. You stretch beneath the covers and realize you've survived another medieval night, a small victory. But before you can congratulate yourself, someone pulls open the curtains. A rush of cold air and responsibility floods in. Morning routines in a castle wait for no one, not even sleepy nobles. Rise, my lord, a voice says softly, and you blink at a servant holding a candle and a basin of water. The words are polite, but there is an unspoken urgency beneath them. Fires to relight, rooms to air, and, perhaps most importantly, bedding to beat within an inch of its life. The morning ritual wasn't just about getting dressed. It was about reclaiming warmth and order after the nightly chaos of frost and darkness. Servants hurried in with fresh logs, shaking out tapestries to release the damp. In larger households, the first task of the day was rekindling the great hall fire. Without that, no one, noble or not, was moving willingly. You sit up slowly, the linen of your nightshirt clinging slightly to your skin, and reach for the basin. The water inside is icy, meant to wake you faster than any modern espresso. You splash it on your face and instantly regret every decision that led to this moment. Medieval mornings didn't ease you awake, they ambushed you while you're thawing your nose. The servants began their well-choreographed dance. One gathers up last night's chamber pots. Don't ask, be glad someone else is doing it, while another shakes your fur coverlet to banish any lingering child or critters. The smell of smoke and damp straw fills the room as they work, and outside, faint voices echo in the courtyard. The castle is alive again. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Castle households followed a strict daily rhythm tied to daylight. In winter, dawn routines began late, sometimes not until 7 or 8 a.m. because candles and torches were expensive. Servants waited for enough light to work safely. In summer, though, the same duties might begin hours earlier. Life revolved not around clocks, but around sunlight. You swing your legs out of bed and feel the icy kiss of the stone floor again. A servant quickly places a wool rug beneath your feet. Small act of mercy. Someone else brings your day clothes, freshly warmed by the kitchen fire. It's an unspoken truth. If you were noble, you never dressed yourself completely. That's what squires and attendants were for. Peasants, meanwhile, had already been up for hours, milking cows and trudging through mud while you were still arguing with your blankets. The air smells sharper, now burned wood, morning chill, and the faint sweetness of oats cooking somewhere below. You can almost hear the clatter of pots in the kitchen, the barking of dogs, the rhythmic strike of a blacksmith's hammer starting his day. You think about how mornings must have felt back then, not gentle, but bracing. There was work to do before the sun set again. Fires to tend, animals to feed, bread to bake. Sleep, such a precious and fragile thing during the night, ended abruptly with daylight's demands. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some nobles had warming servants whose entire job was to make sure their masters didn't experience discomfort upon waking. They heated clothes by the fire, aired furs, even pre-warmed shoes with hot stones. It sounds indulgent, but in a world where catching a chill could spiral into fatal illness, it was practical luxury, and probably the world's least glamorous dream job. The more you watch this scene unfold, the more you realize mornings in the Middle Ages weren't about relaxation, they were about restoration. The castle had to come back to life each day, piece by piece. The same fire that protected you at night now needed feeding again, every hearth across the fortress demanding attention. Even a moment's neglect meant another creeping chill by evening. Outside your window, the sky brightens reluctantly. The moat's surface glints like dull steel, and crows call out from the battlements. Below, servants hurry through the courtyard wrapped in cloaks, their breath visible as they carry buckets of water from the well. Someone laughs loud and unbothered by the cold. You envy that kind of early morning enthusiasm. Historians still argue whether mornings in medieval life were busier for the rich or the poor. Nobles had staff to handle chores, but also endless rituals, prayers, and political duties. Peasants faced back-breaking labor, but enjoyed simpler routines. Both, in their own ways, lived by the tyranny of daylight each sunrise, a ticking clock counting down to dusk. Your attendant finishes, lacing your tunic and gestures toward the small table near the hearth. A modest breakfast waits, bread, cheese, and something warm in a wooden bowl-likely pottage, the catchel stew of grains, and whatever else the kitchen could spare. You take a cautious sip. It's salty, smoky, and comforting, like the edible version of a blanket. It strikes you how different this rhythm feels from the modern world. The night was long, the sleep segmented, and the morning cold, but everything had a kind of patient logic. People respected the pace of nature. The castle didn't fight the dark. It simply endured it until the light returned. You glance back at your bed curtains drawn, sheets still rumpled, a faint indentation where you slept. In a few moments, servants will strip it down, beat the straw mattress to air it, and set it right again for tonight's battle against the cold. The cycle never ends. Each night, the castle freezes. Each morning, it thaws. And maybe that's the quiet wisdom of this place. Every sunrise is a small triumph. Every rekindled fire, a reminder that endurance, not comfort, was the key to survival. You step toward the window slit, pulling aside the shutter. Pale winter light spills in, blinding after so much darkness. You breathe in the crisp air, smell the faint temps of smoke from a dozen hearths below. Somewhere, a rooster crows, impossibly late, but determined. You smile to yourself, thinking of the night just past, how people centuries ago faced the same cold, the same restless sleep, the same reluctant mornings. The world has changed, but that feeling of rising from warmth into chill, of chasing light after dark remains universal. And as the first real beam of sunlight lands across your hands, you realize that the miracle isn't that medieval people slept through such cold. It's that, somehow, every morning they woke up again ready to do it all over. By mid-morning, the castle has shed its sleepy silence. Servants dart between corridors. Voices echo from the great hall. And the clang of metal dishes rings faintly from the kitchens below. But your eyes wander back to the heart of the room, both literally and socially. If last night was a battle for warmth, then the fireplace was your greatest weapon. You step closer to the hearth, where the fire has been rekindled into a cheerful blaze. Its light paints the stone walls gold, and the warmth radiates outward like a soft exhale. In the medieval world, this wasn't just furniture. The hearth was life itself, and learning how people used fire not just for heat, but as an anchor of routine reveals exactly how they survived the bitter cold without losing fingers, tempers, or their minds. The first thing you notice, the smell. Smoke clings to everything, the walls, your clothes, even your hair. It's the scent of daily existence. Most castle chambers didn't have chimneys until the late Middle Ages. Smoke was expected to drift upward, out a vent, or through cracks in the roof. In reality, it often lingered like a moody ghost. You cough gently and wave the air, and for a brief moment, you understand why so many medieval portraits show people looking slightly tearful. Fire was never constant. It had to be nurtured, protected, and strategically placed. In smaller chambers, the hearth was usually shallow, with a hood above it to funnel the worst of the smoke. The servants kept it burning as long as possible, using peat, wood, or even dried animal dung when wood was scarce. Every spark was precious. Matches didn't exist, and flint and steel were fickle companions. Letting the fire die out completely meant a cold, miserable restart. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval fire maintenance was so crucial that many households employed a watcher of the fire, often a servant whose only task through the night was to keep embers alive. They would bury the coals under ash before bed, preserving a tiny glow until morning. If they failed, the entire house could spend hours struggling to rekindle it, or worse, freezing in silence. You kneel down, warming your hands. The stone floor near the hearth is surprisingly warm, absorbing heat like a quiet ally. You can almost hear the crackle and hiss of damp wood as it burns, a sound both primal and oddly meditative. Somewhere in your memory, it connects you to every ancestor who ever sat before a flame and thought, "At least I won't die of frost tonight." Of course, not every fire behaved itself. Soot built up fast, and stray sparks were a real hazard. Castles were fortresses, but also tinderboxes waiting for an excuse. One spark too close to a tapestry or straw mattress could turn a chamber into a funeral pyre. Servants carried buckets of sand or water for quick dousing. And some rooms even had stone floors specifically to prevent fire from spreading. You look up at the blackened ceiling beams above the hearth, the scars of countless winters etched in soot, the reminders of both survival and danger. Fire was comfort, but it demanded respect. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some regions, families treated the hearth as a spiritual being. They spoke blessings before the fire each night, or tossed in a crumb of bread for good fortune. The flame was thought to house a spirit or guardians, sometimes even the souls of ancestors watching over the household. There are records of people greeting their hearth in the morning, whispering, "Good day to thee, old friend." Little odd, maybe, but when the only thing standing between you and hypothermia is a pile of burning sticks, friendship seems reasonable. The castle's larger hearths were engineering marvels in their own right. The great hall's fireplace could swallow entire logs the size of tree trunks. The smoke spiraled up into enormous flues, carrying warmth and a good deal of soot through side vents to nearby chambers. These vents were the medieval equivalent of central heating, though you'd be generous to call them efficient. The room nearest the great hall might be pleasantly warm. The next one over got the faint memory of heat. You glance toward the narrow gap beneath your chamber door, where a thin line of warmer air slips in from the hall beyond. It's faint, but noticeably a sign that the day's fires are spreading their reach. Historians still argue whether castle fires were more about show or substance. Was that roaring great hall blaze truly warming the space, or just a theatrical centerpiece for guests to admire? Some argue that its heat barely reached the far tables, where servants shivered under furs while nobles toasted by the flames. Others suggest the psychological warmth was the real point, glowing, symbol of hospitality and control over nature. You imagine it now, the lord of the castle seated close to the fire, basking in its light while shadows danced across his banners. Behind him, flickering warmth would turn armor into molten gold, wine into amber. For everyone else, it was about proximity. Sit too far, and your fingers went numb. Sit too close, and your eyebrows smoked. You reach for the iron poker leaning nearby and give the logs a gentle nudge. Sparks leap up like startled fireflies, scattering tiny constellations across the sooty air. The smell deepens resin ash, and something faintly sweet, like old pine. It's hypnotic, the way fire always is, and yet you can't help but think about how much work went into this simple comfort. Someone had to chop that wood, dry it, haul it through cold courtyards, and stack it neatly. Another had to wake before dawn, coaxing the reluctant embers back to life with breath and patience. Fire was never free. It demanded labor and vigilance. There's something poetic about that, isn't there? The way survival required a conversation with the elements, not dominance over them. You didn't conquer the cold. You negotiated with it through a handful of glowing coals. A sudden gust rattles the shutters, sending the flames bending sideways. You instinctively reach to steady the screen before sparks escape. For a moment, you catch your reflection in the polished metal of faint, flickering version of yourself, formed by the same ancient ritual that kept entire civilizations alive. You lean back, letting the fire's glow bathe your face. Around you, the chamber softens in the light, its rough stones taking on a honeyed hue. The air feels alive again, layered with movement and warmth. You can almost hear the whisper of every generation that sat by a hearth like this one, telling stories to keep the dark at bay. Maybe that's the hidden truth of medieval fire. It wasn't just about temperature. It was about gathering people, drawn together by necessity and instinct, faces illuminated by shared flame. The hearth didn't just heat the castle, it heated the soul of the place. You close your eyes, letting the warmth sink into your bones. For a moment, it's easy to forget the cold outside, the damp walls, the endless chores waiting beyond the door. There's only the crackle of fire and the soft hum of survival. The same melody humanity has been playing since we first learned how to hold a spark. The warmth from the hearth fades gradually as you step into the corridor, and you immediately feel that familiar medieval chill pressing in again, the kind that creeps beneath its clothes and reminds you that stone walls, while excellent at keeping enemies out, are absolutely terrible at keeping heat in. Your breath fogs slightly in the dim light, and your boots echo over the flagstones as you wander deeper into the castle's belly. You've left the comfort of the bedchamber behind to explore how the rest of this stone fortress fought the cold. Everywhere you look, architecture is doing its awkward best to pretend it understands comfort. The corridor is narrow to conserve warmth, the windows are arrow-slit thin, and the ceilings arch high enough to make you wonder whether the architect was secretly building for giants. Yet even with those towering walls and icy drafts, people manage to live, laugh, and sleep here without turning into medieval popsicles. Your footsteps carry you toward the heart of the keep, the thick central tower that houses everything essential. The great hall lies below, where firelight flickers against tapestries depicting hunts, saints, and battles no one alive remembers. You run your hand along the stone wall, rough and slightly damp. Moisture seeps from outside, forming a faint film of chill that never really leaves. And here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval castles weren't designed for comfort. They were designed for defense. Walls were often 2 to 3 meters thick, built to absorb impact from catapults or battering rams. But that same thickness also meant cold stone radiated inward, day and night. Insulation wasn't a thing. Warmth had to be created, not retained, so people got creative. You pass a narrow side chamber, guardrail, or medieval bathroom hand. Notice how it's tucked into the wall itself. A small shaft leads straight down into the moat. Charming, but notice something else. The shaft also acts as a primitive air vent. When warm air rises from the great hall, it escapes through these gaps, creating an unintentional draft system. In theory, it kept the castle from getting smoky. In practice, it made every room a little bit colder. You take a turn and descend a short staircase, your hand brushing the rope railing slick from age. The deeper you go, the thicker the air becomes. Down here, where storage rooms and servant quarters lie, the temperature steadies cold. Yes, but not bone-cracking. Earth insulates better than air, and the thick lower walls trap the day's faint heat. Servants often slept in these areas, huddled together in groups, wrapped in cloaks and each other's body heat. Romantic, hardly, but practical. Absolutely. You pause at the bottom of the stairs and peek into a storage room. The faint glow of a lantern reveals barrels, hanging meat, and sacks of grain. It smells like smoke, leather, and something faintly vinegary. A mouse skitters across the floor, probably living its best life. A couple of servants are already at work here, stacking logs and refilling baskets of kindling. You nod, pretending you belong, and one of them gives you a suspicious glance, probably wondering why a noble is snooping around the coldest part of the castle. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some castles actually built heated rooms using a system called a hypocaust, Roman invention that circulated hot air beneath raised floors. It worked beautifully if you were wealthy enough to afford it and patient enough to keep it running. Most castles couldn't manage that luxury, so the hypocaust became more legend than standard practice. But a few remnants survive in old abbeys and manor houses, showing that even medieval architects dreamed of underfloor heating long before modern plumbers arrived. You continue walking, tracing the castle's secret roots of warmth or lack thereof. The kitchens, you realize, are the true furnace of the fortress. As you approach, the air grows warmer and richer, full of the smell of roasting meat and baking bread. The great ovens and stoves generate enough heat to make this wing almost cozy. Workers move briskly, faces flushed, arms dusted with flour. The kitchen was where people wanted to linger, not just for food, but for warmth. You stand by the open hearth and feel the difference immediately. The air here hums with life, heat, and motion. A cook barks orders as apprentices haul heavy pots to and fro. Someone laughs, someone curses, someone sneezes into a cauldron, which, frankly, feels authentic. It's chaos, but it's warm chaos. And that's what matters. Historians still argue whether castles were genuinely cold death traps or simply perceived that way by modern standards. Some point out that layers of tapestries, thick wool garments, cast in fires, created more tolerable environments than we assume. Others argue that the chill was constant and unavoidable, especially in drafty great halls. The truth probably lies somewhere between a world where comfort existed, but only through relentless effort as you leave the kitchen. The temperature drops again, reminding you how fragile warmth is here. You pass through the servants' hall, where rough benches line the walls. A small brazier glows faintly in the center, offering just enough heat for people to thaw their fingers. You notice the soot stains climbing the walls above each abstract mural of survival. You follow a corridor that leads back toward the upper levels, past storerooms and wine cellars. The stones underfoot shift from packed earth to polished flagstone. With every upward step, the air grows thinner and colder again. The higher you go, the more obvious it becomes why people clung to fire, furs, and each other. At the landing, you find a small alcove with an arched window slit. You peer out at the courtyard below, where stable hands lead horses through frosty breath and a blacksmith's hammer rings out in the distance. From this height, the castle feels like its own frozen world, sealed off, self-contained, and entirely at the mercy of the weather. You draw your cloak tighter and smile wryly. It's strange how a fortress designed to withstand armies could be so helpless against something as ordinary as winter. Yet, somehow, they thrived. Families grew up here. Children were born, knights trained, feasts were held, songs were sung all within these unheated walls. Maybe the secret wasn't in the stones, but in the mindset, a quiet resilience built from centuries of adaptation. You glance toward the stairs leading upward, where the soul of the family's private chamber waits. Their tapestries hang thick, candles flicker gently, and a brazier glows beside the window. It's a small haven amid all this granite and frost as you climb. Your boots thud softly on the steps, and you think about how warmth, in the medieval sense, wasn't just physical. It was communal. It lived in the kitchens, in the crowded servant quarters, in shared blankets and whispered jokes in the dark. Maybe the architecture wasn't built for comfort, but the people inside were. They learned to carve warmth out of stone by the time you reach the upper floor. You can almost feel it's the subtle warmth radiating from lives lived close together, fires tended with care, and mornings survived one after another. And as you step back into the dim glow of the solar, a thought lingers. Maybe medieval castles were never truly cold. Maybe they just required you to earn every degree of warmth you got. You step softly into the solar, that prized refuge tucked high within the castle part living room, part private retreat, and, in winter, the closest thing a medieval noble had to paradise. The moment you cross the threshold, the difference is almost shocking. The air feels softer, the colors richer, its faint glow of a brazier playing against woven tapestries and polished wood. Compared to the damp corridors below, this is warmth made visible. This, you realize, is where warmth was engineered. The solar wasn't a grand hall meant for show. It was a family's daily cocoon, a carefully curated bubble against the cold world outside. The stone walls are lined with thick hangings, painted scenes of saints and battles, and occasionally, just because someone could, a unicorn. These weren't just decorations. They were medieval insulation. Wool and linen tapestries trapped warm air against the stone, reducing drafts that would otherwise snake through like uninvited guests. You stand near the small fireplace, smaller than the great halls, but still lively, and watch as a servant uses iron tongs to adjust the logs. The crackle is gentle, almost private. You can smell the resin and smoke mixing with beeswax from a half-melted candle on the nearby table. For the first time all day, your shoulders drop. The cold still lurks at the edges. Okay? Here, it feels manageable. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the 14th century, solas had become standard features in castles across England and France. Originally built above the Great Hall to catch rising heat, they evolved into private quarters for lords and ladies. These rooms often had windows glazed with translucent horn or thin panes of glass, luxuries that kept out the wind while still allowing a milky light to filter through. You move closer to one of those windows now, running a finger along the cool lead latticework. Outside, the landscape lies under a soft haze of winter mist gray fields, dark trees, the faint glimmer of the moat. The sound of distant voices echoes up from the courtyard, muffled by the thick walls. It's peaceful in a lonely sort of way. The soulless furnishings tell their own story of adaptation. Cushioned benches line the walls, layered with wool blankets and furs. The heavy table holds writing tools, parchment, a small sand shaker to dry ink. Beside it, a chair with a high, carved back faces the hearth, clearly the Lord's spot of choice. The wood is worn smooth, where hands have rested for years. You imagine the rhythm of life. Here, the lady of the house sewing by the fire, her children reading aloud from illuminated manuscripts, a hound curled up on the floor, twitching in his sleep. Outside, frost bites at the battlements, but inside, there's conversation, warmth, and the faint hum of humanity persevering. Then there's the scent faint, but deliberate. You catch hints of herbs hanging from the rafters. Rosemary, lavender, maybe a sprig of juniper. These weren't just for show. They freshened the air and, according to medieval wisdom, warded off disease. The belief that foul smells caused illness wasn't entirely wrong, just incomplete. So, in a way, the solar smelled like safety. And now, for your quirky tidbit. Wealthy nobles sometimes owned portable heating devices called chafing dishes or foot warmers. Imagine a small metal box with holes on top, filled with hot coals and tucked under robes or near feet. It was the medieval equivalent of an electric blanket, minus the plug and, modern fire codes. Some chroniclers even mention women slipping these under their skirts during long dinners or church services, proving once again that fashion has always been negotiable when toes are on the line. You sit down in one of the cushioned chairs, the wood creaking softly beneath you. It's easy to understand why the solar became the emotional heart of the household. The Great Hall was for feasting and politics. This was for living. In here, people read letters, embroidered, discussed estate matters, and occasionally napped beside the fire while pretending to pray. Historians still argue whether solars were primarily private family rooms or semi-public reception spaces for close friends and guests. Some records describe them as intimate lounges where the lord and lady retreated from the noise of court life. Others suggest they doubled as offices or council chambers. The debate remains unresolved, perhaps because medieval privacy wasn't the same as ours. The idea of being alone simply didn't exist the way it does now. A servant brings in a fresh pitcher of warmed ale, surface steaming faintly. The smell of malt and spice fills the room, blending with the earthy scent of burning wood. You take a sip, and the warmth spreads through your chest, a liquid antidote, to the winter beyond the walls. You notice a few personal touches scattered around the solar, a polished comb of bone, a carved rosary, a small wooden chest with metal fittings, each one a fragment of daily life made with care and carried through cold seasons like tokens of stability. These were people who built comfort piece by piece, not through abundance, but through intention. The fire snaps sharply, and you glance toward it just in time to see a stray spark leap out, bouncing harmlessly off the hearthstone. The servant tuts and adjusts the screen again. The sound is soft, domestic. It's ordinary, and somehow that makes it extraordinary. It's funny how much effort went into creating coziness, in a world that didn't even have a word for it. You can almost picture a medieval noble wrapping their fur cloak tighter, sighing contentedly and declaring, "Ah, yes, the absence of freezing to death. How delightful," you chuckle quietly, earning a confused glance from the servant, who probably assumes you've gone slightly mad from the cold. Fair. You wander to the far side of the solar, where another doorway leads to a smaller side room, a bedchamber, or perhaps a study. The bed there is simpler, but the same logic applies. Furs, heavy curtains, a brazier near the footboard. Someone has left a half-played chess game on a nearby table, the ivory pieces catching the firelight like tiny ghosts mid-battle. You resist the urge to move upon. What strikes you most is how human this space feels. The solar isn't about grandeur or defense. It's about survival made beautiful. Every inch is designed not just to keep you alive, but to remind you that life is worth living even in the middle of a frozen fortress. You sit by the window again, sipping the last of the ale, watching the faint snow begin to drift down. The flakes catch the weak light, swirling gently over the courtyard below. Somewhere out there, servants hurry with cloaks and buckets. Knights shout over the sound of clanging armor, and kitchen smoke rises into the gray sky. But in here, for a moment, everything is still. And maybe that's the truest form of medieval luxury. Not gold or jewels or banquets, but a quiet room, a steady fire, and a soft miracle of warmth earned through patience and care. Afternoon drifts lazily across the castle like a tired cat, slipping through cracks of cloud and shadow. You find yourself wandering again, drawn now to the hum of life echoing from the great hall below. The solar may have offered peace, but the great hall offered company, and company in winter was as vital to survival as firewood. As you descend the spiral staircase, the faint strains of laughter and clinking metal grow louder. By the time you reach the bottom, you're greeted by a wave of warmth, noise, and smells that instantly makes the earlier silence feel centuries away. Fires roar in two enormous hearths, and the flickering orange light paints the room in motion shadows dancing across banners, flagons, and faces flushed from drink and heat. This is the castle's beating heart, and in winter, it beats loudest. You walk past long trestle tables where servants rush between benches, ladling steaming broth into wooden bowls and slicing bread thick enough to act as both plate and insulation. A pair of dogs doze by the fire, twitching every so often as scraps tumble within range. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Great Hall was the social core of every medieval castle or manor. It served as dining room, courtroom, reception space, and when temperatures plummeted to communal living room. Even nobles, who had private chambers, often preferred to spend daylight hours here, surrounded by bodies, warmth, and gossip. You find an open bench and sit down. The air here feels alive. The steady crackle of fire, the rhythmic clang of ladles against the cauldrons, the low murmur of conversation. It's chaotic, yes, but also comforting. Medieval people weren't afraid of noise the way we are. Silence meant isolation, and isolation meant cold. Across from you, Squire polishes his master's boots while trying not to nod off. Two servants argue over whose turn it is to fetch ale from the barrel. A minstrel plucks at a lute, his tune wobbly but determined. Life, in all its smoky, shivering glory, continues. You glance up at the rafters, blackened with centuries of soot. Between them, a faint layer of heat gathers strapped just beneath the thatched or tiled roof. Medieval engineers knew this. They built high ceilings to draw smoke upward, preventing suffocation while keeping the lower air just tolerable. The smell, though, is impossible to ignore. Wood smoke, tallow, stew, and the faint temps of unwashed wool. It's not unpleasant, just human. The table before you groans under its modest winter feast. A dish of pottage, a slab of salted pork, bread so dense you could use it as a defensive weapon. Someone slides you a cup of ale, warm and slightly sour. You take a sip, and the flavor surprises It's not bad, just ancient. Here's your quirky tidbit. Medieval ale was often brewed weak on purpose, so people could drink it all day without toppling over. Water wasn't always safe, so small ale, with its low alcohol content, became the beverage of choice for both peasants and nobles. Children drank it too, because, well, hydration matters. If it comes with a mild buzz as you eat, notice how communal warmth works differently here than in your private chamber. It's not just heat from the fires, it's heat from people themselves. Bodies pressed close, laughter echoing, the energy of shared survival bouncing from wall to wall. You realize that in a medieval winter, warmth wasn't only a physical goal, it was a social necessity, and maybe that's why the Great Hall was always alive. Every night brought new tales, songs, or arguments to distract from the cold lurking just outside the walls. Storytelling wasn't just entertainment, it was insulation for the spirit. A bard begins a tale at the far end of the room, his voice rising above the chatter. Something about a knight who fell asleep on his watch and woke up encased in frost. You smile, knowing full well it's part cautionary tale, part comedy. The listeners laugh at the right moments, gasping when the hero supposedly chopped down a tree with his frozen sword. Everyone knows it's ridiculous, but that's the point. Laughter keeps you warm. Historians still argue whether castle life was as social as these depictions suggest. Some sources describe bustling halls filled with conversation and merriment. Others imply a more subdued routine punctuated by long stretches of solemn duty. The truth probably varies by season, region, and how many barrels of ale had been opened. But one thing's clear. People relied on each other to survive both boredom and cold. A page passes by, carrying a tray of candles to replace the ones that have burned low. Wax was precious, but darkness was the greater enemy. Soon, the hall glows anew, each flame mirrored in the polished metal dishes and goblets. The light bounces across the faces of everyone gathered, young, weary, joyful all, united by the same flickering firelight. A noble at the high table stands to make an announcement, his voice booming through the smoky air. You catch phrases about taxes, land disputes, and next week's hunt, mundane details that, in this setting, feel oddly reassuring. Even bureaucracy has its place in the rhythm of warmth. You can't help noticing, too, how much the heat fluctuates across the room. Near the fires, it's almost stifling. You can feel sweat prickling at the back of your neck, but step a few meters away, and a chill nips at your fingertips again. People subtly shift positions throughout the meal, edging closer to the hearth whenever possible, like orbiting satellites around the sun of burning oak dot. At one point, a servant stirs the cauldron with a ladle the size of a spear, releasing a fresh wave of steam that smells of onions, meat, and hope. Someone starts a song off key, but spirited in, soon half the hall joins in, pounding the tables in rhythm. The noise shakes the rafters, but no one minds. The firelight flickers like applause. You lean back, soaking in the moment. There's something almost timeless about it, the way laughter rises against the cold, the way fire makes strangers into allies, the way a shared meal can turn survival into celebration. Maybe this was how medieval people really endured the winter, not just with furs and fires, but with community. Warmth was an act of togetherness, a physical metaphor for belonging. Eventually, the laughter quiets, the plates empty, and the music slows. Servants begin clearing dishes, tossing scraps to the dogs, refilling the fire one last time before the night shift takes over. The hall dims, but the air remains soft and full, like the lingering echo of warmth itself. You glance once more at the massive hearth, the steady pulse of orange light within it, and think, this is what it meant to keep the cold away. Not to banish it completely, but to hold it at the edges, together, for one more night. When night folds back over the castle, the day's fires shrink to embers again, and that comfortable warmth you'd found in the great hall begins to ebb. You drift back toward your chamber, through corridors that hum faintly with wind and echo with the muffled sound of boots, shutters, and distant voices. Somewhere, a dog barks. Somewhere else, the drawbridge chains groan. It's late in the kind of late, where even the candles seem tired. You pass the servant, kneeling by a brazier, coaxing reluctant coals into life for the night watch. The faint glow paints her face in amber and shadow. She glances up, nods, and goes back to her careful work, breath steady. Movements practiced. Back in your room, the curtains have been drawn tight, the bed remade, the furs fluffed into inviting piles. The air, though, still carries that hint of chill that sneaks through every crack. You toss a log into your hearth and crouch to nurse the flame. It catches with a sigh, and slowly the shadows retreat from the corners. You stretch your hands toward the fire and listen. Outside, the castle is settling into its nocturnal rhythm. Guards pacing the walls, hooves clopping in the stables, the occasional creak of wood contracting against frost. It's a lullaby of creaks and drafts, as intimate as any song. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Nighttime life in castles was highly structured. Servants extinguished or covered all but essential lights after evening prayers, and fires were banked, that is, covered with ash or dampened fuel to keep coals alive until dawn. Torches in corridors burned only where needed, both to save wax and reduce the risk of fire. The result was a world that flickered rather than glowed. You step away from the hearth, eyes adjusting to the softer darkness, and feel that medieval quiet settle into your bones. It's the kind of silence that doesn't exist anymore. The hush of stone and wind and distance from the modern world. You pull back the curtains of your bed and slip beneath the covers. The sheets are cool at first, but the furs quickly trap your body heat. You can feel the faint weight of the wool. The prickly comfort of coarse linen against your skin. The mattress, still firm with straw, rustles as you shift, releasing that sweet, grassy scent again. The candle by your bedside flickers once, twice, then steadies. Its light trembles across the wooden beams above, catching the faint carvings. Someone left long ago a flower, a cross, maybe initials. You imagine the hands that etched them, perhaps out of boredom during some long winter night. People have always found ways to leave a mark. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some medieval people genuinely believed that sleeping near firelight invited spirits or demons to visit through the flames. So they'd cover the hearth at night, not just for safety, but for spiritual protection. Others, though, thought the opposite, that keeping a flame alive guarded them from evil. It was the original nightlight debate, fought one superstition at a time. You turn slightly, pulling the covers closer, and let your mind wander. Outside, wind whispers through the arrow slits, making a low, hollow sound like someone sighing through their teeth. You can almost imagine the cold itself prowling around the castle walls, pressing its icy palms against the stones, trying to slip inside. Inside, though, you're wrapped in warmth, fragile, earned warmth. It's easy to see why medieval people treated sleep almost like a ritual. The layering of blankets, the banking of fires, the prayers, the closing of curtains, all small ceremonies of survival. Each act said, "We've made it through another day. Now, let's hope we wake again." You think of everyone else sleeping within these same walls. The servants curled together on pallets in the hallways, the guards dozing in their cloaks by the gate, the cooks snoring near the kitchen fire, every one of them wrapped in some version of the same hope that morning will come, and their toes will still be attached. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually slept better than we do. On one hand, their days were longer, their bodies exhausted, and artificial light minimal. On the other, nights were loud, smoky, and drafty. Some suggest their sleep was segmented not by preference, but by necessity, a side effect of constant discomfort. Maybe they woke not because of natural rhythm, but because their noses froze halfway through the night. You chuckle softly at the thought, then yawn a long, slow exhale that melts the edges of your awareness. The fire murmurs quietly beside you. Its glow dances on the inside of your curtains, flickering gold and red like the heartbeat of the castle itself. You remember the earlier warmth of the great hall, the laughter and music and light. Up here, the solitude feels deeper, but not unpleasant. The castle seems to breathe, timber soughing, fires cracking, wind sighing through unseen cracks. It's a symphony of survival, clad in whispers. You wonder what dreams these people chased as they drifted to sleep centuries ago. Did they dream of summer, of battles and hunts, of warmer lands far beyond these frozen walls? Or maybe, like you, they just dreamed of a morning without frost. A log in the hearth splits with a pop, startling you for a heartbeat before settling into a steady glow. You pull the blanket up to your chin and smile faintly. It's not exactly luxury by modern standards, but it's enough. As the warmth seeps through, your thoughts slow. You think of the servants banked around the kitchen fire, the guards tracing the battlements, their breaths fogging in the dark. You think of the horses shifting in their stalls, the faint clatter of chains, the steady pulse of life beneath all this stone. And, for a brief, drowsy moment, you feel connected to the fire, to the castle, to every soul who's ever drifted off in a room like this, whispering a quiet prayer to make it to dawn without sleep. In this place is an escape. It's an act of faith. The candle gutters. The fire hums. Outside, snow begins to fall against soft, steady, relentless. The castle endures, one breath, one ember, one heartbeat at a time. You close your eyes. The warmth holds. The first hint of dawn comes quietly, no trumpets, no rooster call, just a subtle lightening of the air. You stir beneath the furs, your breath slow and even, the straw mattress creaking softly as you shift. For a few seconds, you hover between dreams and waking, and the line feels blurry enough that either could be real. Then you hear it, the faint clang of a bucket, the scrape of a poker in the hearth, the hushed footsteps of servants starting their endless day. Morning has returned, and so has the work of keeping the cold at bay. You stretch an arm out from beneath the covers and instantly regret it. The air bites, sharp and eager. You yank your hand back under the blanket, muttering something halfway between a curse and a whimper. A few seconds later, you try again, this time with determination. After all, even medieval mornings demand bravery. The hearth glows with faint coal's sleepy red eyes blinking in the gray light. You crouch beside it, blow gently, and feed it a few splinters of wood. The fire answers like an old friend slowly, reluctantly, but faithfully. Soon, the small room glows again, and the shadows shrink into the corners. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval mornings in castles began long before sunrise, especially for the lower ranks. Servants rekindled fires, carried water from frozen wells, and prepared food long before their lords stirred. In winter, this meant hours spent working in near darkness, often guided only by memory and a single flickering candle. For them, the day began not with warmth, but with the battle to create it. You rub your arms, watching your breath bloom in the cold air. Your clothes feel stiff from the chill, your shoes slightly damp. The stone underfoot holds the memory of the night like a grudge. And yet, you can almost taste the promise of the new day. Bread baking somewhere below. A faint whiff of smoke and salt. The rhythm of footsteps on stairs. You step to the window and ease open the wooden shutter. A thin wash of pale light seeps through, painting the frost that clings to the iron bars. Beyond them, the world glitters. The courtyard below is blanketed in snow. The stables, puffing smoke from their vents. The trees wearing icicles like jewelry. It's breathtaking, but it's also brutal. You can feel the cold in your face, even from Hiranchen unbothered. Endless.u. Imagine the guards on the battlements, stamping their feet to keep blood flowing. The servants in the kitchens blowing on their hands as they peeled turnips. The falconer rubbing frost off the hoods of his birds. This, too, was castle life. Not just survival, of persistence, the daily recommitment to warmth. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some medieval households, nobles believed that morning air was dangerous to inhale before sunrise. They would wrap their faces in cloths or furs to filter the damp, cold air, a kind of medieval face mask against imaginary germs. Ironically, given the soot and smoke indoors, thought me'd have been the cleaner option. You dress layer by layer, pulling on wool, tunic, hose, and cloak, each one adding another fraction of warmth. Every rustle of fabric, every buckle fastened, feels like gearing up for battle, not with swords, but with winter itself. Outside your door, the castle is waking. Servants carry steaming pots toward the hall, voices hushed but quick. You follow the scent of porridge and wood smoke, passing the same corridors that last night whispered of sleep and frost. Now they echo with motion and purpose. When you reach the great hall again, it's transformed. The fires roar anew, and sunlight spills in through the narrow windows, turning the smoky air gold. People move everywhere, laying trenchers, feeding dogs, pouring ale. Laughter has returned, tentative but genuine. The same stone walls that chilled you last night now seem alive with the warmth of morning. You take a seat near the hearth again, hands extended to the flames. The air here smells of bread and meat, wood and wool, humanity itself. You glance around at the faces near you, some still bleary-eyed, others already cheerful. They survived another night, just like you. Historians still argue whether castle mornings like this were joyful or merely efficient. Were people grateful to see another dawn, or just resigned to the cycle of labor and cold? Records suggest both, but one thing is certain: the rhythm of waking, warming, and working bound everyone together, regardless of rank. The cold was the great equalizer. You sip from a cup of steaming ale, letting the warmth bloom in your chest. The chatter around you grows soft and steady, a human counterpoint to the crackling fire. You think back to everything you've seen in this place, the endless layers of blankets, the smoky air, the shared laughter, the fragile hope of warmth that connected everyone within these walls. And you realize that not freezing to death wasn't just about blankets or fires or clever engineering. It was about attitude. These people didn't wait for comfort, they made it. They turned discomfort into community, routine into ritual, and hardship into history. Outside, the snow keeps falling. The castle will stay cold. The nights long, the firewood dwindling, but life continues, as it always did. You smile, tracing the rim of your cup, feeling the faint tremor of heat through your fingertips, because somehow, despite all odds, they endured, and now, so do you. The story softens now, like a candle nearing its end. The fire crackles lower, and the light in the great hall flickers into a gentle hum of gold. The laughter fades to murmurs, the footsteps slow, and even the air seems to exhale. You take one last look around this old stone world. The walls, the tapestries, the narrow windows, saw bathed in the kind of stillness that comes only after effort. The people here will keep tending their fires, layering their furs, whispering their prayers against the cold. You could almost feel their shared heartbeat echoing through the centuries. Outside, its dawn brightens to a pale silver, spilling across rooftops and ramparts. Snowflakes drift lazily down, catching the light like feathers. Somewhere, a bell rings, soft, distant, timeless. The castle breathes again, steady and strong, and you breathe with it. The warmth you feel now isn't from fire or fits from the story itself. The idea that people, long before you, found comfort in the same small things: shared meals, glowing embers, laughter in the dark. They didn't conquer the cold. They learned to live beside it. So, as you let your own room fall quiet, picture that ancient fire burning slow and steady, far back in time, casting its glow across stone and straw, across everything that came before. Let that warmth drift forward, gentle as sleep, till it settles somewhere deep in you. You made it through the night. Sweet dreams.